Greetings, David Stewart here. And here is my book, Muramasa, Blood Drinker. Yes, here it is in beautiful paperback. I'm actually very pleased with how it came out with a nice bright red against the white. It's really, really striking. I love the cherry blossoms on the back. This is a book that if I saw this sitting on the bookshelf at the bookstore, I'd want to pick it up and open it up and read it, which is exactly what I want a book cover to do. But I'm not here just to tell you about this wonderful, beautiful paperback that you could purchase from Amazon.com. Links in the description, but also to give you a little bit of insight into how I designed this, what goes into the design of a book, because this is 100% designed by me, the interior and the cover. And if you're an indie author or an indie graphic artist, it's a really good idea to know how to format a cover for your book if you're going to go through like CreateSpace or any sort of print-on-demand application, especially, or you're just going to self-publish in general. You can save a lot of costs and a lot of time by knowing how to do this yourself. You don't have to rely on another person's timeline if you're hiring someone else to do the design. You don't have to do all these revisions. You can do it all yourself. And it can also be like very particular to your tastes, which can be a good or bad thing. If you have good tastes, then hopefully it comes out okay. So I'm going to focus on the cover for this because there's a lot that goes into this cover compared to some of the stuff I did in my live stream. So I did a couple live streams the last couple weeks where I showed how to design a book cover using just one static image for both of those covers. And that's a really easy and efficient way to design a book cover. Find an image you like, put the words on it, bam, you have a good looking book cover. Make the words pop and look good. There's not that much to doing that, but there's a lot more that went into designing this book cover, so I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to just show you all the cool techniques that I did to make this book cover, I guess, come alive. So let's take a look at it. First thing that you'll notice here, I did this again in Inkscape. Inkscape is a free vector-based program, but it has a lot of great tools for pixel-based images as well. If you don't know what vectors are basically where rather than having a bitmap image like what you'd have with JPEG, where you have basically a chart of what pixel is where and what color, you have a mathematical formula that's defining a line, so you could blow it up infinitely. You can make it as big as you want or as small as you want, and there's no loss in quality. So when you print at a higher resolution or higher DPI, you're not going to notice the flaws, or if you blow it up really big, you're not going to see individual pixels or anything like that. So that's a big advantage of using a vector-based program. What I like about Inkscape is that it also works really well with images, making the whole process very easy. A lot of people do their cover design in Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator costs money, and if you're just starting out or if you're indie, it's great to go with the free program. But I will say that Inkscape is actually extremely powerful. It's much more powerful than its cost would suggest to you. It's not just like a shovelware program. It's actually a really, really full-featured design program. I'm really, really happy with it, and I've learned a lot about using this particular program, and I'd like to transfer some of those skills to you. So first thing you'll notice, so that's the first thing you'll notice. It's an Inkscape. Next thing you'll notice is that it doesn't look like the cover, right? What you get when you're designing a book cover is you have to design this, right? You got to design the front cover, the spine, and the back cover all as one document. And that's because it gets printed out and then sort of wrapped around the book to make the final thing. So you'll also notice there's these blue lines everywhere. These are guides that you could create in Inkscape, and you can do that just by dragging from the ruler. You can create a guide anywhere you want. And the guide is a perfectly straight line to help you line things up. You can turn on snapping over here on the side, up in the corner, that will sort of snap things onto those guides to make sure you're really lining everything up perfectly, better than the human eye, which definitely helps a lot. I created this document using a template. And this template was generated based on the paper selection that I was going to use, which I just used white because it's a nice white book and I wanted bright white pages. It's just what I wanted. You could do cream colored pages or off-white or something like that, depending on what printer you want to go through. But this little template was generated based on how thick the spine would be. So it created the dimensions of the spine and then also gave you the dimensions of the book. This is a 5x8 book. I actually did, just so you know, I didn't go through CreateSpace with this, and I'll probably talk about this in another video. I went through a beta version of Kindle Direct Publishing that does paperbacks, and I really wanted to just see how that service would turn around, and I'm so far I'm pleased with it, and I'm pleased with how the product came out. But for this purpose, they're the same, right? The They'll have the same exact requirements for the books. They're going to print at the same sizes. It's probably printed at the same facility. It's just going through like a different logistical process to get the book out. So anyway, it will actually create this template for you. And all I did was open the template in Inkscape, and it created the correct document size. Then from there, with this is just an image. You can move it around. I created all the guides to show me a couple of things when I was designing it. The first one is the very outside edge, which is called the bleed. In between the cut line, which is this middle dotted line, hopefully you can see it a little bit on your screen. That's the cut line where the machine will actually cut the pages so they're nice and level. And the very edge of the actual image, that's called the bleed. So what actually you want to do when you're designing a cover is you design the image to hang over the edge of the book, so that when it's cut, if there's any sort of misalignment of the machine when it cuts, if it cuts slightly short or slightly long, the image remains intact. Because if it cuts the book very slightly larger than the actual cover would be, you'll end up with this white line around the cover that may look quite bad. So you avoid that by basically pulling that image slightly off the edge of the page. That's called the bleed. And you have the bleed around the edge. And then you have another little orange area on this template that is if the machine cuts it a little too short. So you want to keep things out of that orange area, that white area, and this is called the safe zone. That's how you ensure that whatever is in this white area is going to end up on that part of the book. So if the fold of the cover is slightly off, you might have an edge of this end up slightly over here. Usually you don't want to do an edge this hard, but I just did it. Because to me, it wouldn't matter that much if there's a slight flaw. Like with this one, you could very slightly see some blood on the edge. That didn't matter to me because I see it in, full run publisher books anyway. And same thing on the other side. So whatever's in the white, you know that's going to show up. And then they also tell you where the barcode is going to be. This barcode location was actually very slightly off, the barcode on the final product, because this was that beta version I was talking about. It's actually slightly bigger than what they listed, which is fine. I designed around that possibility as well. With that in mind, let's talk about all the stuff that went into designing this. This is not like a single image with text like I was doing on my live streams. This has a lot more to it. This is a lot closer to that Patrick Rothfuss cover that I sort of copied and showed all the techniques for. It has several images that are blended together. So let me show you what those images are exactly. So I'm going to slide this over a little bit, and we're going to start with the front cover, which incidentally is just a modification of the original Kindle edition I released last year. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the text off. There it goes. It disappears. So it's just white text. This is not a font. A bunch of people have asked me, what font did you use for the cover of Muramasa? Answer is it's not a font. I hand drew this, and I drew it with a tool in Inkscape that just happened to look appropriate. And it's this tool over here, which is the calligraphy tool. And you can, you can draw whatever sort of cool curves you want to. And I did it on a touch screen PC, not this PC, but my laptop, which is a touchscreen. Pulled it up and I just drew it, and then from there you can actually edit the nodes. And if you go in real small, you can adjust a little bit any sort of brushstroke to make it really nice looking, and that's what I did. I grouped all those different little objects together to make the Muramasa Blood Drinker logo. So let me go ahead and move some of these letters off to the side real quick, and you'll see them later. Next layer down, we have this blood splatter. This blood splatter was actually not created by me, but was created by an artist named Elena Lee, I think is her name, and I believe she's from the Ukraine. But she created the blood splatter and the little cherry blossoms, and I actually found those on Shutterstock. Remember, we did that big search on Shutterstock. So if I slide that over, this was originally an image on... There was a vector version of this image. I ended up using the pixel-based version of the image simply because the vector wasn't working out the way I wanted it to. You could see a bunch of odd lines within the vector, so I used the PNG and just generated it. Just generated a high-res version of it. I actually removed the background from it using Microsoft Word, and you can actually see like some very slight flaws with this blood splatter, and maybe I'll correct that on a future edition, but it's not really noticeable on the print version so much, so I didn't didn't worry too much about it. And this extra blood splatter I created myself. So this blood splatter I bought because I liked the way it looked, and for this version of it, I had to learn how to do some extra blood splatter. I added some blood splatter basically to fill in the negative space on this side of the big katana here, and just kind of get rid of that white. In Japanese art, there's actually a lot of white on the paper, but it just didn't look that good when I was looking at it as a book cover. There was just a little too much white right here, so I just added a little bit of blood to fill that in because the negative space was bothering me. Negative space is like where there's just a space on the image where nothing's happening. I'm not going to give you any specific aesthetic values of that. But the way I created this blood splatter was actually not by drawing it. You can draw it. That's a vignette. I'll show you that in a second. You can draw the blood splatter. I didn't. What I used was a font, and I'll show you the font that I was using. It's called WC Ricis. There it is, WC Ricis A Beta, and there's also B Beta, so there's two different versions of this. And all it is, it's a font that, rather than displaying a letter, displays like a different bunch of ink blots. So if I just type in some random characters like that, we'll go to over here, text and font. I'll select from the menu here WC Ricis A Beta, and you can see it's going to look like some blood splatter. Hit apply, and then you can change the color, and you can also change with fill and stroke. Oops, I don't know why that happened. With fill and stroke, you can also change the transparency. There's the other thing about a free program is sometimes there's little glitches. So we hit fill and stroke, and we can also change the transparency here, so you can make it a little more transparent if you want to, which will kind of create some different effects. That's how I did it with this one. This blood splatter over here, this is why I learned to do that with this font, is I figured out that you could make your own blood splatter because I wanted the logo to be over here, but this blood splatter that I kind of bought wasn't working. So I had to make my own. I had to learn that skill, and I chose to do it with a font, which was a massive shortcut. So this is just actually a palette of letters that are colored different shades of red and kind of melded together with different levels of transparency to create this like splattery blood look. And this is just a copy paste of Muramasa Blood Drinker, the logo, with the addition of a colon. Likewise, David Van Dyke Stewart, here's a copy paste of this David Van Dyke Stewart, but just in black and without these inward drop shadows. So next thing, let's look at, this is just a vignette. And using a vignette, if you're going to make a white cover like this, it's actually kind of important because that's going to define the edge of your page. So when you print it out, it's rather paler when you print it out, which is to be expected. It's not going to show up quite as much as it originally would, but it kind of gives you a little more definition to the page and a little more depth, like it's a physical object and not like a white sheet of paper. I used it actually on both sides, and I'll talk about the back cover in a minute. But with the white thing on Amazon in particular, you don't want like white edges because it's just going to blend in to the background of the web page. You really want the image to be a little bit more defined when you're selling it on Amazon. So that's another reason to use a vignette, a good reason, in my opinion. So there's the vignette. I use the same vignette for all three sections, just shrink down. So I shrink it down to like, this narrow bit for the spine, and you can just use the same vignette. Next is, the Almond Daiba, the sword. This is a font called Edo SZ. I also used it for the interior of the book in a couple of different places, like right here, Muramasa Blood Drinker. And by the way, you notice those ink spots underneath Muramasa Blood Drinker. This is something unique I did with that font, because you can embed fonts when you print this sort of stuff, so embedding the fonts is a good idea. But for every little section break where I would normally do an asterisk, instead of doing an asterisk, I did a set of ink spots, and each one in the book is actually totally unique. There is no two that are exactly alike. Each one has been designed to be completely unique from every other section break, which I think is a great touch. All I did to do that was I searched the book for the asterisks, and then replaced all the asterisks with random characters and put them in this font. So every single section break has a very unique ink spot. Now, it could be an ink spot or a blood splatter, depending on what you want, but because it's in black, I think, you could take from the cover and be like, oh, that's blood. Or you could think about the character Amaya in the book, who's a painter and is always doing these ink paintings, and it could be her ink spot. So it's just a nice little touch. And some of the fonts on the outside I used on the inside, particularly Edo SC, which is sort of my act headings, and then I used some other brush-like fonts on the interior just to give it a little bit more character on the inside. Next thing on the cover, let's head back to the cover real quick. Cover file. You have this katana. It's just a picture of a katana I got off Shutterstock, and the background is actually still intact. If I were to bring it up a couple of levels, what you'd see is that in fact, I'll bring it up to the top. I just turned an image of a katana. I really like this one. This is actually not a good image of a Japanese sword. I mean, it's an image. It's a good image, but it's not an image of a good sword. Let's put it that way. The hamon is fake. I can tell that because it's uniform. You never have a uniform hamon. That's this kind of little forged line on the edge of a katana. Maybe I'll make a video in the future sometime talking about all the stuff that actually goes into a Japanese sword. But it was on a white background, which I wanted, and it was very, very clear and sharp and high res, and would, even though it's not a good sword, we don't really need a good sword on the cover. We just need an image of a sword to let people know the genre that we're dealing with. So, which is samurai fiction. So there you go. There's the sword. The next thing is the name. So all I did for this name is I didn't do anything like particularly special. It's I think a Perpetua font, which is a font I like. It's very, kind of reminds me of old movies, kind of like the big title fonts on old movies. And all I did was I did a drop shadow, but rather than doing a drop shadow inside the letter, I did the drop shadow out, or rather than doing the drop shadow behind the letter, I did it within the letter. So you can do drop shadow, and you'll get this dialog box. I don't know why this document keeps shrinking. Shadow type, outer would be the normal one. Inner would be the one that we would actually do to produce that effect. And I like that effect because it looks like the letters are sort of pressed into the cover. I think that that's actually a pretty cool effect. And you can see there's so much to this document that even on my computer, which is a pretty hefty computer, it lags a little bit. Next thing, let's take a look at the spine. The spine is the same, the same logo on the blood splatter. I explained how I did that. This is a copy paste of this, just in black. At the bottom, you see my DVS Press imprint, which is, my website, dvspress.com. So it's an extra little touch there. This vignette on the side is just the other vignette shrunk down and squished so that it fits on the side of the spine. Next thing, let's look at the back cover, and I'll give you all the elements of this. Notice we have more blood splatter. Okay, the blood splatter, it's the same thing. It's that font, just colored, different levels of transparency to create that effect. And I really liked how it kind of flowed into these cherry blossoms. I think it had a really, really good effect. You can see the square where I've sort of marked out where the UPC code would go. I didn't put anything there that was important. All the words are elsewhere. First thing is, let's take care of that vignette. So this vignette is a little bit lighter color vignette because this back cover is gray rather than sort of a pure white. The next thing, this is Edo SC again, so let's just move that to the side. Really, really nice, strong brush font. Very, very striking. Next, let's look at these. Let's look at this little square. Actually, no, let's look at the words first. So how did I get the words to sort of go around the tree? Let me zoom out a little bit, and I will show you. What you'll notice over here is a shape. So if I click that, watch what happens when I move it. The words move too. What I did was I wrote the words with a text box using this tool. Then I drew this shape, which fits right here, like this. Then I selected the text, and I selected the shape, and I went text, flow into frame. And then it puts it in the frame. And then from there, I just moved that shape away. Alternatively, it's not working right now for some odd reason, but alternatively, you could just make this transparent. So I'll show you another way to do this that doesn't involve moving the shape away. You just click the shape and make sure it's ungrouped. You go to stroke paint, and right here you just turn the alpha channel down to 0, and then the box just disappears. One little warning, if you are going to use that transparency, and I think I moved that shape off to the side because of this issue, although I didn't end up doing this in the final sort of version of this cover. If you make this completely transparent, it may still show up when you convert this to a PDF. So if you go directly from Inkscape to a PDF, and this issue is somewhat present with Illustrator as well. Occasionally there's a bug. But PDF doesn't do transparency so well. So you end up kind of rasterizing most of your transparency effects, and sometimes that shape will end up showing up in the PDF, which is unwanted. You want it to be invisible. Okay. So the way to get around that is you export it as a high-res PNG image and then convert it to PDF. No, you're not able to select the text in the PDF that you end up creating that it's going to generate your cover, but that's okay because no one needs to like be selecting the text on your cover. They need to just be printing your cover. So that doesn't really end up mattering. So if I move the text off, let's look at the next thing here. I'm going to show you a little trick that I did. Up here, I've selected an object. I'm going to move that object off to the side. What is that object, you say? Well, if you look closely, you'll see it's a box with a gradient at the bottom going to transparent. And all I did was I put that box right there to blend this lower picture into the upper half of the cover. And that was necessary because, as you can see, this picture is not perfectly white. So the way I did that was I just drew a box using the box tool. And I just drew a box like over a little bit hanging over into this image. And then I set the transparency up to 100. I set the stroke to a gradient, and then I used this gradient select tool, this green with 2 lines tool, to make the gradient go just at the bottom of the image. And then with this, you can also select both colors. So the first color, you can select it, and you can click this little dot, and you can just select a color from in there, and that will end up working for you. And then for the second one, the second dot here, you can just turn the alpha channel all the way to 0, and it should create a gradient. For some reason, this isn't creating the gradient that I wanted. I'm not sure why that is. Oh, it's because I did it with stroke. Never mind. So you got to do it with fill. I clicked the wrong one. Stroke is the line on the outside. Sorry for that mistake. So do it for fill. Do it as a gradient. Click the gradient tool. Set it to here. Go down here to there. And then you just create the gradient, right at the bottom. You actually just don't really need much. When you select this upper one, you can do the little dropper, and bam, it should be gray. And then for the bottom one, you can select the dropper, and it'll be gray. And then you just select that one again and turn the alpha channel all the way to 0. And then you basically have this little transparency. And then it just kind of disappears. And if you look at the physical copy, you can't see there's no seam. It's completely seamless and looks perfect. So that ends up working out really well. That's a little trick you can do to sort of extend the background of the picture up if it's a pretty flat, as long as it's a pretty flat background. And notice that I have the texts. The text is sort of over it, which really is going to disguise any seam that's there. It's going to be disguised by the text covering it up. So that's another trick that you can do. So there it is, flow into frame for that, a little gradient box, this image, just some text at the bottom, and that's all it is. This was just something I created to stick here to help me make sure that I remembered not to put anything on that UPC. But I pulled that off before I printed it because if the UPC, for some reason I put this cover with like another printer and their UPC code is slightly different, you don't want like some weird gray box showing up that doesn't contain any art. You just want to leave that space for your knowledge of where the UPC code is going to be. So that is pretty much everything that went into this cover design. There's actually quite a bit, quite a few different images sort of blended together, a lot of little design pieces to make the whole product come together. You can buy it at Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk, or actually any regional Amazon should have it by now. It should be going across the board. When you buy this paperback, by the way, if you haven't bought this book yet from me, you will get the ebook for free. So please consider buying it if you haven't bought something from me yet and you like physical copies. I think it came out really well. I'm quite proud of how it came out, and hopefully you'll like the design and you'll like the feel and you'll like the look of it. I believe it's $12.99 for a trade paperback. That's actually not, that's competitive market price. Usually they're $15.99 to $20 for what's considered a trade paperback, which is the bigger paperback, versus a mass market paperback. I don't have one handy. I don't think mass markets are a little smaller. They're like the ones of the cheap pulp paper you get at the airport before you get on the plane. So this is a little bit better. This is a little bit better version of this than a mass market paperback. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you guys have a great day. Please don't hesitate to tell me what you want to see in the future. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that business. And if you want to hit that bell so that you can, get updates from me, I would appreciate that as well. Of course, you don't have to. It's up to you. You are the user. But if you found this useful, please let me know. Please give me any comments down below. And I'm always appreciative of the interactions. And keep reading, guys. I'll see you next time.